G'day guys, my name's Ralph Mayhew and I am the pastor of Burleigh Village Church, which is currently meeting in house churches. So what you've stumbled upon today, if you're not meeting in a house church, is our house church resource. And so this is a message that's integrated with opportunities to converse and to chat and to think. It's shorter than our longer form of this, which can be found on our channel of Burleigh Heads Uniting Church. It's actually our playlist on this channel, which we'd love for you to check out. If you'd like to connect with us, we would love to connect with you. So whether that's via text message here, whether that's by phoning us here, or whether that's by contacting us through the webpage here. And if you go to the web page, you can go to our landing page and you'll see where you can get connected in with us as a church. You can get connected in with Alpha, which is a resource we run if you're exploring faith, or you can become part of a church house group, or just come along and check it out. So we'd love for you to be part of that process. We're currently doing a series called Life in the Kingdom, which is basically what our lives could look like and should look like if we put our faith in Jesus. It's all about the difference Jesus can make. And so I encourage you to keep logging on, keep following us along, keep being part of this, and if you feel up to it, to engage further, because we'd love to get to know you. So I'm going to jump now to a different location and we're going to pray as we step into today. Let's pray. Lord, as we talk about forgiveness today, and as we step into Lent and look toward the cross and the triumph of your life on that, move in us. Meet us, forgive us and empower us to forgive others. And be close as we talk about these things that are so raw. Be close to us and comfort us this day as you forgive our sin, as you forgive the rebellion of our hearts against you, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Well, I'm still a young thing. What do you imagine when you hear the word kingdom?
I imagine like castles.
Castles?
A really big castle. Like lots of big castles and like roads, and they look like they're made of sand, but they're actually made of bricks.
Windsor, is there a place called Windsor Castle? Yes, I believe there is. Yes, where I went there, that reminded me of a kingdom when I met some important person, I can't remember which.
Her Majesty, perhaps?
Yes, that would have been it.
Fancy, big cities.
A nice town and kingdom, yeah.
A big kingdom.
I don't know.
Kingdom? Kingdom? Palaces.
A king?
I imagine a castle, a rainbow, and rain. Except not much rain because there's a rainbow. It's a sun shower.
Heaven.
What do you think God's kingdom looks like?
Lots of people. A big throne. Not castles.
Lots of houses and stables. I think it looks like a kingdom full of kindness and love. Love.
How do you mean?
Like loving people and caring for other people.
The garden, perhaps, maybe? Yes, I think the garden.
Garden of Eden.
A big building. God.
I think his kingdom is in the clouds.
Heaven.
What do you think makes a good king?
Kind and loving, and that everyone can trust.
A loving king.
Not just think about yourself, but to think about others and to be generous and kind and loving.
Benevolent. A benevolent king is a good king.
He'd be nice.
To be honest and caring.
A king?
Caring, generous, looks after his people.
Kind, loving person who always checks the weather.
If they're wise, caring and kind.
To be nice. Generous, kind, and nice.
So, you're wondering, House Church, why we're filming in the church, and the reason is because all these changes are happening. And I think next week you'll be able to be here. We're going to do a house church in the corporate church, and the following week we'll do corporate church. But yeah, next week you'll be here and you'll get to see what it's actually looking like, and the echo, go, that it's here. But we've mic'd it up so brilliantly that you can't be distracted by that as we go forward. Anyway, that's where we're going, so you'll get to see that next week. Today, I want to talk about forgiveness. Martin Luther King, who was a man who knew a thing or two about forgiveness, he said, "Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a permanent attitude." And he spoke those words out of something Jesus had said when he was having conversation with his disciples in Matthew. Matthew 18, verse 21 says, "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or my sister who sins against me? Like, up to 7 times?' And Jesus answered, 'I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. What on earth was Jesus talking about? The trap that we can fall into is that I need to keep count of how many times I've forgiven someone. And this is talking about a single act. It's not talking about a person, it's a single act. And once I've forgiven them 7 times, Peter's saying, surely we're good. It's this legalistic idea of just tell me what the rules are and I'll operate in the rules. The current rule, cultural rule at the time was from the rabbinical school was 3 times. You forgive someone 3 times. Now, that's not a lot, but the reason it was there is that people in the society knew that they couldn't sin against someone 4 times, so it held their behavior in check. It's like 3 strikes and you're out. And so this idea of 7 times is presented. 7 times, that's like twice and a bit more than twice what the current expectation was. And Jesus just blows it up. He starts by saying, not 7 times, which he says, but 77 times. If you read the King James Version, it says 70 times 7, 490. Like, what? And why do you have 77 and 490? What's that about? It's because the Greek is vague. And the reason the Greek that the Bible was written in is vague is because it doesn't matter. Jesus is not wanting us to count up to 490 times or up to 77 times and go, all right, now we can cut them loose. He's saying you shouldn't even have to count. It should be a permanent attitude of your heart, an orientation of your heart. Forgiveness isn't an occasional act. It's a permanent attitude. So how does that quote challenge the way you think and engage with forgiveness? Have some conversation about that now. A long time ago, about 20 years ago, I remember writing a list. I took an A4 piece of paper, I put a line straight down the middle, and on the left-hand side of that list, I wrote down all the ways that I had been hurt by people that were close to me. And so I wrote these things, how I'd been betrayed, how people had said things, how situations had gone down, and I felt like I'd been wronged. Now, footnote, looking back on that list and the things I would have put on that list now, my current self goes, oh my gosh, Ralph, you were in a really pitiful and petty state. That was not too crash hot, but at the time it was real. And so I remember writing this list down and feeling sort of justified that I had all these reasons that were now in black and white to hate people that had wronged me. And there was this moment of prayer where I felt God reiterate into that and just sort of say, you know, I've actually forgiven you more than the wrong done against you. You've wronged me more than others have wronged you. It got me thinking, caught me off guard, and so I started writing down by the side of each of these things all the ways God had forgiven me in parallel with how I'd been wronged. And I realized very, very quickly that the wrong and rebellion of my heart against God was far, far greater and had been going on a lot longer than any of the sin that had been done against me and the wrongdoing against me. And I looked at this list and I had this moment of realization that God has been pouring all this forgiveness and grace into my life, and I've been withholding it from others. And I wrestled with that. But I have a right to this. People have wronged me. It's my right. And almost God saying, no, you relinquished your right when I forgave you. Let go of it. And I remember having to choose. Do I hold on to my side of the list and forfeit God's side of the list? Or do I hold on to God's side of the list and forfeit my side of the list? You cannot hold on to both lists at once. It's impossible. And so I did. I dared to take hold of God's list. I dared to let go of my list. And I became free. The forgiveness flowed from God through me to those other people, and it was done and it was finished and they were forgiven and I was released from it. That's how God works. He says, choose one of the lists. Choose your list, lose my list. Choose my list, lose your list. You've got to make a choice. So I want you to write a list now. Are there things that people have wronged and hurt you about that you actually need to put down on paper? And then next to that, and this will take 10, 15 minutes, next to that, write a list of how God has responded to each of those. And then I want you to tear that list in half and carry around the God list. Forget about the other list. Let it go. Forgive those people. Release it. Let's go do that now. Romans 5:8 said, but God demonstrates his love for us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God dares to go first in the forgiveness game. He dares to bestow his grace upon us and his forgiveness upon us like he's opening a fire hydrant and drenching us. It's unescapable. It's ridiculously generous. It's totally undeserved. And it's directed toward us, toward you and I. God desires not to hold our sin against us, but for us to be free, for us to be reconciled to him, for us to no longer have rebellion in our hearts toward him, but instead a kindness and a desire and a passion and affection for him. He desires to remove our sin and bring us into right relationship with God. Now here's the question. If you're in right relationship with God, is there any room for your bitterness? If that relationship between you and God is right, is there any space for bitterness? And the answer is absolutely not. Tom Wright talks about it like this. He says, think about it like breathing. When you breathe in, you then have to breathe out. Now let's do a little bit of demonstration. We're not going to pause, but as I talk, I want you to hold your breath for as long as I can. If you're able, medically, don't pass out or die on us, okay? But let's do it now. So big deep breath in and hold your breath. Now, as I talk, you've engaged this oxygen and CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's come to reside in your lungs, and gradually your body is burning up that oxygen. And right about now, your lungs should start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and then they start to burn, and then they start to get toxic, and then you have to breathe in again. You have to renew that there is goodness to breathe out. Forgiveness is the same. When God forgives us, some of you have just actually stopped now. Well done. But when God forgives us, we breathe in that forgiveness. And then we're meant to breathe that out into the relationships of others. But when we don't, when we breathe in God's forgiveness, we have right relationship with God, and then we hold on to it, but we refuse to breathe it out, it becomes toxic in us. It starts to hurt. It changes the fabric of who we are, and it destroys the relationship we have with God. We cannot hold on to bitterness, guys. We cannot do it. We need to relinquish that. We need to breathe it out. And we can breathe it out because we're breathing out the very air that God has breathed in. God has given us this forgiveness, and it's out of that forgiveness that we can forgive others. That we can look at our 2 lists and go, God has done this in my life. I can let go of this. I've breathed in this, so I can breathe out this, and I can let people off the hook for the mistakes and the hurt and the intentional acts of hatred that they've done toward me. Do I live by my side of the list and let go of God's side of the list? Do I live by God's side of the list and let go of my side of the list? It's challenging, isn't it? So here's the real challenge. What about when you've been extremely hurt? I'm not talking about someone pinching your parking space or saying something mean to you online or being rude to you. No. What about when something really significant happens and you're really hurt? And your first reaction is, I can't forgive. I can't let go of this. How do I come to terms with this? What about when you've had your power stripped away from you by someone who's more powerful, who just didn't care, and they use that for their own good? What about when you've been vulnerable and people have exploited that? What about when you've been super trusting and people have betrayed that? What do you do in those situations? You know where the rubber really hits the road, where it's super serious, where you've got to get this stuff right and it's just not easy. What do you do then? Well, Jesus' brilliant answer applies again. Don't forgive 7 times, forgive 77 times. And what Jesus is saying is keep on forgiving, keep on breathing. Breathe in and breathe out. And when that breath is breathed out and there's still a problem, breathe in and breathe out. And when that problem is still there, breathe in and breathe out, and keep forgiving. And when it rears its ugly head in your thinking, you go, now hang on. I need to breathe out God's forgiveness into this situation toward that person. It's not for their good. It's for yours and God's. And when you're plagued by it, when it ambushes you and sneaks up on you and you find yourself ruminating on it, it's at that point you need to go, I need to ruminate on God's grace and God's forgiveness of me, and I need to, out of that richness, offer toward this. Forgiveness is never easy. The greater the harm done to you, the harder it is. But because God's grace and forgiveness is greater than everything, it is more expansive and wide and deep and rich and wonderful than any sin ever done against us. There is always more from which you can draw on from God to bestow on another, to forgive them. And it's not for their benefit, it's for yours. And so I want to invite you today into a space with each other where you might share if there's things that you're really struggling to let go of. And this might not be for everyone, it might be just 1 or 2 of you, it might be no one, and then that's a wonderful thing. But there's some of you there that are really struggling to let go of something. You need to come to a point of forgiveness. There's a safe space to share about that, and to have people pray and champion you and walk with you through that you might be able to breathe in more of the grace of God and bestow it on others.